And it's been so windy
Not
here
at
today.
all. Welcome all to my paranormal closet where the stories and magic take place. Today's guest is one of Paranormal UK's own, and I'm thrilled to have him on. Please join me in welcoming Paranormal Dimensions host, David Young. Hi, David.
Hello, Eleanor. Pleased to be
Okay,
on.
we're going to cover. I'm so glad that you're here. We're going to cover your UFO stuff before we get into the paranormal stuff. And I remember you saying it was around 2010 that a project you were working on was decommissioned, and that project was suddenly done and over with. But if anything came of it, it was this interest to visit the area. And when you realized that just down the coast, about an hour or so, was Pensacola, Florida's Gulf Breeze, which apparently was the site of a great UFO flap that you had heard about. There you go. You got something that was a little bit blurry, but what does that read? I can't read it.
But oh yeah, you can't really read it. It's the Gulf Breeze sightings, and the man who wrote this book was Ed Waters. Was a name that I couldn't remember before when we spoke.
And did you say something about it? It wasn't really. You don't think it actually happened?
Well, I know there were several people that saw things, but like I mean, let's just go back to where I came into this. I was sent over to like the Pensacola area for my work back in just after 9/11. Actually, it was just before the Gulf Wars were breaking out, and when I found out that I was just down the coast from Gulf Breeze, I thought I'd take a little drive down there, which was not far. I'd actually driven through there, actually from Pensacola to Fort Walton Beach, without realising it, to be honest. And I thought I'd take a little drive down there and see what the area was like, because it's kind of on the Gulf from Mexico and all of that area is. And really, I was quite fascinated just to see the area. But I did actually realise that there's a lot of aircraft flying around that area from Hilbert Field, which was where I was working on the AC-130s. And they do a lot of laser work on the... I was actually working on that equipment, which was the all-TV equipment, which was actually used for targeting the terrorists, if you want to call them the terrorists. Anyway, I believe that, let's put it like this, if there's a UFO in that area, which there may well have been, I do believe in UFOs. I've seen them, and I'll tell you a bit about that a bit later. But I believe that particular Gulf Breeze thing with Ed Waters, I don't believe that was actually, because he was actually found with a fake UFO in his garage, I believe you'll find. They had a model.
Interesting.
Now, his story is that he made the model after seeing the UFO. Maybe that's true, but it's kind of a little bit suspicious, isn't it, when you find that someone's got a model in their garage. So the story goes. But, yeah, I mean, I think it was 1988, wasn't it, I believe, that...
I think it was. It was definitely the 80s.
87, 88. Yeah.
Yeah.
When the story broke, and my own personal belief, I mean, it's only my own personal belief. I believe that wasn't actually a real event. But saying that, it doesn't mean that there's not UFOs being seen in the area by other people. It's quite...
Sure.
They're seen everywhere.
Well, I've had my own experiences with UFOs myself, and you said your first encounter was in like 1958 or 59 with an unidentified flying object while you were sitting on the front steps of your home in London, right?
When I was a child, I was sitting on my steps. Before we actually moved to Essex in England here, I was actually sitting on my steps looking up at the stars, as children do. Well, I did anyway. Just sort of imagining what they were. Basically, I didn't really understand what stars were, to be honest. And all of a sudden I noticed there was a star moving and stopping and moving and stopping, and it was to my left, it was up that much, and I just thought it was a star moving and stopping at the time when I was sort of 8 or 9 years old. I think it was roughly about that time. It was only sort of when I got to my teens later on, I started realising what stars were. You start to understand more what stars, and you think, well, stars don't do that. So what was that I saw? I don't know. It was certainly before the days of satellites flying around. you know, because they came along sort of like the late 50s into the early 60s. And then satellites don't move and stop either. So, and we certainly didn't have any helicopter, you know, many helicopters back then as well. So what that was,
some people tend to argue that fact that they had hidden technology that we are not aware of in the government.
Yeah.
And because I know that they're even with the whole moon landing and the argument about whether that was legitimate or not, that supposedly there wasn't technology available in order for them to accomplish that feat. And so there's this argument that,
you see, I've got an opinion on that, because I was actually working on a lot of space technology back in the mid-60s. That was my job. That was my
so tell me, what are your thoughts?
My apprenticeship, when in 1966, 67, I spent. Well, I was always, in fact, it was my lifetime job. Actually, in fact, working on military electronics. That's where I started off, and I saw back then what the capabilities were of working on space equipment. I worked on a few space projects myself on the electronic side of it. And then later on, I was on the AC-130s. So I said it was LTV laser equipment. So they did have the technology back then. I think a lot of this, I mean, my own personal opinion, once again, is that I think a lot of this problem that people have with this space program and landing on the moon is the fact that it was 50 odd years ago or 60, and people find it hard to believe that we've gone through that and we haven't gone back again. And I think, you know, that children have been born within this, you know, from the 70s, 80s onwards, and they can't actually understand that the fact that, well, why haven't we been back again? Well, we've not needed to. And I can actually understand how they've not lost the technology, but they used old technology to do it, you know. And the fact that I don't think if we wanted to do it again now, we've got to start from scratch again with new technology. You know, it's and of course people. When I know in my own job, for instance, when I was working on the AC-130s, there was quite a team of us working on the equipment. But it got to a point later on when people drifted away and left the job and whatever, and I was actually the only one working on the job in the end, and I knew both sides of it, like the electronic side and the mechanical side of this massive piece of equipment that went on the AC-130s. And so I can understand quite easily how they lose the capability of doing it, basically, because if I'd have gone at the time, there was a particular time when I was working on it. If I'd have gone, they'd have had nobody that knew how to do this, you know, crazily, that could do this equipment. So, you know, so I can understand how they would lose that capability. Although not necessarily, I don't think they've actually lost that equipment, you know, to be able to get to the moon. You know, I think they just lost the manpower capability. I'm sure they had all the information and everything for it, you know. So that's just my opinion. Well, I believe they went to the moon, yes, and it wasn't just once; it was 6 times. So,
okay. Well, then you had a major UFO sighting many years later in 1967 when you were living in Basildon, Essex, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, which is not too far from where I live now. Actually, I moved to Suffolk. And I've moved back here again. Yeah, I was walking home from my girlfriend's house early hours of it's probably midnight, early hours of the morning. And as I'm walking down the street, it was in Basildon. It's like a country setting. It's not like in the middle of a big city or anything. It's quite a country, rural setting. So I'm walking down the road towards my home, and I saw this big orange oval object going across the sky, completely silent. It wasn't a bright orange. It was like an incandescent orange, and it was different shades of orange, if you can understand that. It wasn't a one continuous orange. It's very difficult to explain it, but at that time, it definitely wasn't an airplane, and it was quite big in the sky, you know. And I'm saying oval, it was an oval shape, but I mean, it may well have been round for all I know. If it was on its side, it would look oval. So, as I say, I don't know what that is, but I did actually track down a book a while back called, excuse me a moment, The Complete Story of the Worldwide Invasion of Orange Orbs. And the man that wrote it was a man named Terry Ray. I don't know if you can see that.
A little bit. It depends. It's out of focus
It's a bit blurred
at sometimes,
yeah.
but yeah, the way you put it, I was able to see it good.
Yeah, I managed to get Terry Ray on my show. Actually, I tracked him down to get him on my show, and
Interesting.
it was quite an interesting show he put out. These orange orbs have been seen all over the world actually for many years, but it seems like from the dates that I've got in this book, I must have seen an earlier one because mine was in *67. Most of the reports I've seen here are sort of after that. So that was quite an interesting thing. I mean, he's got like an array of orange orbs on the cover, but I only saw the one. You know, he's got like in a V shape here.
I've always wondered because different sightings have warranted different shapes and sizes. And I had a gentleman by the name of Russ Kellett. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's out of the UK too. And he was an abductee, and he was on my show, and he was telling me how there are different shapes and sizes of. That there are different shapes and sizes of UFOs because they come from different parts of the universe. That was his explanation for it.
Yeah, I've got I know Russ Kellett.
Then while you and your wife,
that's all I'll say on the matter.
While you and your wife were living in Suffolk, you discovered that you were living near Rendlesham Forest and where the famous 1980 UFO took place. Yeah, why don't you tell us about that?
That's actually quite an intriguing story that built up from that. Actually, I found I was living near Rendlesham Forest, and how this all came about. I mean, I've known about UFOs for many years, right? And I'd read about the UFO incident in 1980 at the RFI, as they call it, the Rendlesham Forest, and I'd heard all the stories and the tapes by Colonel Holt and everything else like that. And it was in 2015, I think. 2014. I heard there was a conference taking place at Woodbridge, and who was going to be appearing there was Colonel Holt himself. And a lady, I think Brenda Butler, was going to be there. She wrote a book called Sky Crash. And I went along to this conference, not knowing what my future was going to be getting involved in this. You know, one thing led to another. And I ended up being very good friends with Colonel Holt, believe it or not. But that came a bit later. On that particular night, I actually sort of managed to say hello to him and said I've wanted to meet you for 20 odd years. I think I used the term 30 years at the time, but it may not have been 30 years. It was probably a little bit less than that. I also got talking to Brenda Butler, and I ended up talking. I don't know if people. She wrote a book called Sky Crash, and that was the first book on the Rendlesham incident, believe it or not. And we kind of got talking, and I ended up helping her put her stuff away in the car. But an incident appeared out of that actual occurrence. I was actually sitting next to somebody named Andrew Ross. He was a Scotsman who'd come down from Scotland. Okay.
Ah.
Now, right now, you have to bear with me on this story. Now, the next day, the man who organised this conference was putting out a story that somebody had stolen a photograph from off of his stand, and it was by a man named Andrew Ross. And I'm thinking about, and he put up a photo on Facebook of this Andrew Ross, and I had to get in touch with him to say that is not the Andrew Ross that I was talking to. The Andrew Ross who I was talking to was sitting next to me, who actually showed me the photo on the night, he actually showed me this photo, and he said to me, "Oh, I've just got this from over there." He was in a Scottish accent, and he showed me this laminated photograph. And I said to him at the time, I said, "Oh, what are they giving those away stupidly?" And actually, what it was, he'd actually pinched it. He'd stolen it from, if you want to use the word stolen, it was only a laminated photograph of Colonel Holt. Put it away in his bag, and that was that. But of course, the next day, this other person who was named Andrew Ross also was being accused of stealing this photo. So I don't know how this person got hold of the name Andrew Ross. But of course, I got in touch with the person who ran this conference. I said, "Look, you're using this, you're accusing this person of stealing this photograph, and it wasn't him. It was actually another Andrew Ross who I was sitting next to, because he showed me the photo." Anyway, this is how I kind of got connected with Colonel Holt in the end, because I got quite friendly for a while with this person who ran this conference, which unfortunately turned out to be another big mistake in my life. But eventually, I don't know how to go into this really. I got involved in an investigation into somebody else who was claiming to have been involved in the Rendlesham incident. We got involved in a 3-year investigation into him. It was somebody who wrote the book with somebody else called Left at Eastgate, and that person was Larry Warren. Now, it's okay me mentioning the name, because it's out there that Larry Warren is quite a well-known fraud, actually. Anyway, we got involved in a 3-year investigation into him, because on the night where the Colonel Holt conference in Woodbridge, he was saying that Larry Warren was never out there. And people at that time were getting quite upset about it, because Larry Warren had been quite a well-known figure in the field, and because of this book Left at Eastgate, and eventually it was actually withdrawn when the information that we came up with was presented to his co-author Peter Robbins. He actually got the book withdrawn from publication over it.
Wow.
There's not many books that get withdrawn from publication.
Sure.
Obviously, it's a lot more. There was a lot more involved in all that. Unfortunately, it would take quite a while to sort of unravel it all and try and explain it all. But Larry Warren wasn't actually fully trained, so he could never have been where he was and what he was, because he was only in the Air Force for less than 10 months, and a lot of people don't realise that. When the story goes out here, his story, it makes it look like he was in the Air Force for years, but he wasn't. It was less than 10 months. He was only just past his basic training when he was, and basically straight from basic training in the US, he was sent to Suffolk, Rendlesham, and the event only happened a few days after he had appeared on the base. So, he says he was on guard duty at some remote part of Bentwaters. Bentwaters and Woodbridge is where the event took place in Rendlesham, which is in Rendlesham Forest. He came out with the story that he went out with the group on the third night. And basically, what he did, he used the story of Adrian Bastinza's story, who actually was involved on the night, but he didn't want to get involved in it. And as I say, it's quite a long, complicated story to try and explain it in within a few minutes, really, on a radio show. But what happened was I got invited on a few other radio shows about, and this is why I ended up on my own radio show in the end, because
that's what I was going to ask you, how that came about.
Yeah, well, that's how it came about. I was on a few other radio shows. I think the first one I ever did was on a Canadian radio show about this investigation, and I did a few others. I got involved with. There was a lady named Sasha Christie. Well, it still is. We're still good friends. Sasha Christie knew Larry Warren for about 10 years, right? And I, of course, because of this Larry Warren controversy that was going on, I got very friendly with Sasha, and there was somebody else, Alison Dunlop, who was a Scottish. She runs the Scottish SPI events, and there was another Scottish chap that I got involved with was James Francis Welsh. Now we all we were all kind of investigators in our own right, but we had little bits and pieces, and we started doing our own investigations into Larry Warren, and the things we found out were unbelievable, really, because we were all basically at some point friends with Larry Warren. Certainly Sasha, she knew him for 10 years, and a lot of the things
Must have been a shocker.
Well, he was actually living with her, not living as what she actually did was, she was living in Leeds at the time, the same place as Larry Warren was living, and she had to move out of her place. Larry Warren actually got thrown out of his digs because he wasn't paying his rent or whatever, for whatever reason, and she took him in, and he was sleeping on the sofa in her living room because she had a partner. She had to move out because the person who owned the house wanted to sell it, so she had to get another place. So she ended up living in Liverpool, and Larry Warren actually moved with her, believe it or not, and he was still sleeping on the sofa in Liverpool with Sasha and her partner and her children and everything. Well, eventually Larry Warren got thrown out from Sasha's house because of certain things that happened. Her partner told him to leave, and which I won't go into because it's a rather seedy, horrible thing for the reasons he got thrown out for.
Our connection was lost for a minute there. I'm
right.
Sorry, our connection was lost there. So you said eventually Larry was evicted from Sasha's house.
Yeah, she got in. She asked him to leave, because there was some horrible things going on. He was sort of a drinker, and he'd come home drunk and everything and shouting, which was not very nice. Especially she got children and everything. Anyway, but before that, a few of the things that Larry had been coming out with during the time that he was living in her house, she began to think, well, they don't sort of match up with what he said before, with his story about being involved in the Rendlesham UFO incident. So she started questioning things that were going on, and some of the things that she was investigating, it didn't seem to. He would one of the stories that he came out with was what the CIA or the what's the other security service. Anyway, he couldn't get his service records because they kept them away, and but Sasha found out that he could get his service records. All he had to do was apply for them. So that was another thing that in the book was actually ridiculed. It was actually found to be untrue. So that was just kind of one of the first little things that started to make her suspicious, type of thing, And then he started coming out with other amazing stories about a Bigfoot sighting that he had when he was with his mother in the States, and it's the most amazing Bigfoot sighting that you've ever heard of, But like the Bigfoot.
So it was one thing right after another, apparently.
Yeah,
so you're
crazy stories,
So I'm coming to understand that it was this revelation that this person that was somebody you associated with and considered a friend was a farce.
Yeah.
And is this what led you to do your Paranormal Dimensions, where you could bring forth reveals to the public of things that you felt were untrue, or tell us how that happened?
Not so much that, but I mean, all it was, because I appeared on a few other radio shows. One radio show that I appeared on, they said to me after the show, "Would you like your own show?" And I said, I've never really thought about it. So I asked my wife, I said, "What do you think?" I said, they've offered me my own show. I said, "I've never thought about doing a radio show before." So she said, "Well, give it a go, see how it goes." I said, "Well, okay, I'll say yes to them." Anyway, I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll give it a go." And I just happened to know Irene, who runs our radio, the PA UK radio station. I mentioned it to her, and she said, "You want a radio show? I'll give you a radio show if you'll come onto the network." I said, "Oh, okay then." So I had to say no to the other network, and I joined the PA UK radio network.
I see. And what year was that? What year was that?
Oh, wow, I think that was 2019. I think that was maybe the end of 2018. Okay. So I think it was probably the end of 2018. I started mine at the beginning of 2019.
So tell the listeners what it is that your show is about. What do you put on your show for everybody out there?
Well, very much like yours. I will deal in anything that's paranormal, basically. The first show I did was actually with Sasha, and we covered a lot of what the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. My second guest was Malcolm Robinson, who deals in UFOs and ghosts and all sorts of things, and the Loch Ness Monster, all sorts of things like that. I started out doing a 2-hour show, actually. The first 3 shows I did were 2 hours, and I found that maybe they were just a little bit too long sometimes. And I sort of cut down, rather than doing 2 hours every week. I said I'd do an hour every week, and see how it goes from there. And that's kind of how it developed, really. I started doing an hour show, and I've had all sorts of different guests on.
Well, it makes sense.
Yourself included.
It makes sense that the people that you have on, especially at the beginning, you're going to go to people that you know, people that you believe in, and then you get to a point where you're looking for topics that are going to be interesting to the public. I mean, it's exactly what I did. I put people that I knew on, that I was interested in their stories, that I found believable. But then you also have people on your show that you question, and you think, well, this is very interesting. It makes you think about it. And then it makes you wonder, what if, or is it true? And so you want to be this neutral person and put it out there and ask the right questions, but then it leaves you with food for thought, and then you wonder. So I kind of want your take on that also, because being on this side of things, being the host, it allows you to venture into areas I've never even thought about and hear stories I never even heard about.
Yeah. Well, see, I mean, I look at it as a fact that I'm learning from this all the time as well. And I think you'll find that, like you've probably found yourself, that you get the chance to ask people to come on your show that you may never have got the chance to speak to, because you can put yourself out there to them and say, would you like, you can invite, some big names I've had on the show, and just, and you may never have got the chance to talk to these people. I've had 1 or 2 people I've regretted having on the show, as you probably have, because it's a real struggle sometimes to keep people talking, and to keep the show with some sort of a momentum. You might ask a question to some of these people, and they give you a very short answer, and you've got to come up with something else to ask them. And it can be a struggle at times. But luckily, I've been very fortunate with most of my guests. It's only happened about 2 or 3 times, that I've not been able to keep the momentum going. It's been a struggle, but most of them have been great. I met some I made quite a lot of good friends, as you probably have as well, Eleanor.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was me trying to figure out what I was going to put on the show, who I was going to put on the show, and trying to come up with those interesting guests. And now I'm finding that people are reaching out to me and saying, I have somebody that would like to be on your show. Here is what they want to talk about. Or this person wrote this book and they would love to be on your show, which I find interesting and exciting, because that means that people are listening in on my program and are finding it appealing enough for them to want to put themselves out there. And that is a helpful way of finding guests as well. But it can be difficult at times. It definitely can be trying.
Yeah. I mean, I do try to keep a list going of people that I'd like to get on the show, and I try and keep about 3 months ahead, to be honest. So I'm asking these people sort of months ahead sometimes, and then giving them a date when maybe they might be interested in coming on the show. Well, I've got a list now of probably going into about May, June time. So,
Yes.
which I do try to get, and sometimes they don't work. Sometimes it's they can't make it, or they're sick at the
Something
time,
happens.
or something
Yeah.
happens. But then you've always got someone to fall back on to say, right, can you fill in on that particular date?
Yeah.
And I can usually keep them ticking over that way. The way I'm at the moment, I've actually been doing, whereas I'm doing my shows every 2 weeks now, I'm doing some extras as well, because I've got too many guests that want to come on around about the same sort of time. So I'm having to do some extra shows now to sort of fill them in. And that's kind of what's been happening lately. Or someone will be sick, and I say, can we do it next week? So I'm doing sort of one after the other.
You try and shuffle.
But it's working all right.
What do you find was your most favorite interview?
Oh,
Or interviews? More. It could be more than
very
one.
difficult. I think probably one of the most special shows I've done is just very recently, when I had Jim Penniston and Gary Osborne on the show, both together. They wrote a book called The Rendlesham Enigma. Also obviously all about the Rendlesham event, but Gary Osborne very rarely does interviews at all on radio, and because he'd written this book with Jim, he'd done all the research and everything, it was great to get them both on together. Now Jim Penniston is the one that apparently touched the craft in Rendlesham Woods Forest, and he had the binary download. And Gary's research found that he could never have made up that story, because the binary that he'd written over 16 pages in his notebook, he could never have worked out what the results would be all these years later, 42 years later. So, so it's a fascinating show. I would recommend, if anyone wants to try and catch up with me and have a listen to that show, I'd really recommend it, because it's amazing.
We lost a connection again. The last thing I heard was that he said that there was absolutely no way he could have made that up, that he had to have seen what he actually did.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was just saying that Gary Osborne had done a lot of research. He's written books before about the pyramids and all the measurements and measuring ley lines and everything like that. And he found that Jim Penniston could never have written down the binary code in his notebook and come up with the results that he's got, that Gary's come up with now. He said it was just impossible. He said the code actually proves itself, because what's happened is, because of the Earth tilt and the Earth's wobble and everything, the measurements come out, and what's come out of the binary code. It's very difficult to try and explain this to without sort of designs and everything. But Gary's research is it just shows you that he just could not come up with those results. He explains it a lot better than I can on the radio, actually. But you need to listen to it for about an hour, unfortunately. But the book itself is The Rendlesham Enigma by Jim Penniston and Gary Osborne, and Gary's got a second book coming out hopefully this year, the follow-up book, which explains more about the binary code. So you personally,
from your own experience and what you saw, you feel that there are such things as UFOs from other planets.
Oh,
that's your take on it.
Yeah, most definitely. Whether they're from other planets, I've got second thoughts on that. I mean, I do believe in life on other planets, but obviously, if they could be thousands of years more advanced than us, so there's no reason why they couldn't be visiting. But I've been thinking over the last few years that things could actually be interdimensional as well, and I think there's quite a lot of researchers now that are thinking those similar lines as well. I mean, Jim's thought on that, the Rendlesham experience that he had, is that they may well have been us from the future. Like a type of thing that had come.
That's an interesting, entertaining thought.
Yeah, and Gary seems to think that could be a possibility because of some of the results that he's come up with. So who knows? I mean, in fact, Gary's theory actually goes full circle. The fact that they've come back from the future, so and left this information, and the information that he's writing is the information that he's found that he wrote. Basically, it's kind of gone full circle. It's hard to explain.
Which kind of makes sense, because if his future self can go back and tell his past self something that he needs to know, why not do it?
Yeah, it's crazy, really. It sort of makes your head spin when you start thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, who's to say? It's quite a possibility, you know. But I think another interesting guest I had on, I've actually had Colonel Holt on several times, because he's actually became a good friend of mine. He's actually stayed in my home when we were living in Suffolk, believe it or not. After sort of just going to the conference to meet him, just that first time, he actually became quite a good close friend as well, you know.
Oh, that's great.
Which was amazing. I mean, for anyone that doesn't know who Colonel Holt is, he actually wrote the Holt Memorandum from the base, which was about the UFO incidents from 1980. You know, there's plenty of it on the internet out there. He's been on all the UFO shows and things that you see. Yeah, I mean that the memorandum that he wrote was actually never meant to have been released. It came out really by some investigators. By what was his name? I can't think what his name was. The writers of Clear Intent. Basically got put into the public domain, basically, but it was never meant to have been released. Neither was his tape that he made on the night. So yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot more to that story than I can actually say in a few minutes on here. But he was another good guest that I had on. I've also had another good guest that was out with Colonel Holt on that night, was Monroe Neville's, which is another very rare interview, which you know, which sort of opened a few eyes. They've got some little differences in their opinion and what happened that night, but basically, they were only small differences, really. Oh, excuse me, I've got to take a drink. Might cut that bit out. My throat's going dry. Yeah, it's well, I mean, all I can say is he was another good guest I had on, but I've had so many good guests. It's amazing, really. Guests that I never thought I'd actually get to talk to a lot of the time.
Same.
I did tell you about. Oh, excuse me. You have to cut this out.
That's okay. Go ahead. Until you feel better.
Excuse me. I've had a rather a bad chest over the last few days. My throat keeps drying up. Yeah, sorry, you have to cut that.
That's okay. I mean, you know that I deal with ghosts because that's what started when I was writing.
Yeah.
And when I mean, I've had experiences with UFOs. My kids spotted them in our backyard, and that was a whole incident. They came running in when they were out there night swimming, and I had them sit in separate areas of the house, their friend and the two girls, and gave them paper and writing utensils so that they could draw what it was that they saw, because I wanted to see if they had actually seen the same thing. And when I looked at the pictures, it was undeniably the same craft. And I wrote about it in my first book, and actually put the pictures that they drew in the book too, so that the public could see it. But my whole thing was to write about ghosts because I've been sensitive to spirits since I was a kid, and I owned a haunted shop in town, and I know every area is haunted. That's an undeniable fact. I lived in the Bronx and my house was haunted, and I live now in Sussex County and it's haunted. So that's what got me started writing about the books. But when I was writing that first book, people were coming out of the woodworks with their own stories of UFOs in Sussex County, where I live. And they were coming out of the woodwork with stories about Bigfoot in the area.
Yeah.
So that's actually why I ended up putting the other strange phenomena part into the title, because I can't write a ghost story and include Bigfoot and UFOs. So that other strange phenomena part of the title allowed me to do those chapters as well. And I've continued in that same respect, because all the areas that I write about, people do come out with UFO and Bigfoot stories. And I find that very fascinating. And for me, it was really only that kind of center. And now, as a host of these shows, people are coming out of the woodwork with other cryptids that I've never even heard of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I find the same thing.
other things that, like you said, interdimensional and time travel and that sort of thing. And I find it so interesting because when I was a kid reading books that people wrote just to entertain you, I found it really fascinating and fun. And now these people are coming to me and saying, no, it's real. Here, this is what I found out. And I love to just listen to it. But I was a huge fan of In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries when I was a kid. And so it makes sense that I would find that interesting today. And as a host, want to interview people that could share stories like that with the public.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stories that you do here, they're really unbelievable. And they're so unbelievable
Sure.
that they've got to be true, because who could think some of these things up? That's the way I find. Like I told you, I tell you the story of when I was a child in my cot, and I had this purple mist come into the room. I must have been probably about 18 months old. I know it's hard to tell. I don't know. I was probably on the verge of just learning to talk and stuff like that.
And you
just on the
remember, this stuck with you all these years later.
Yeah, and it stuck with me all those years. You're right. And it scared me to death. There was this purple mist come swirling into the room, came right up to me and swirled around the room, and I'm screaming from my father came into the room basically, and he couldn't see this purple mist, but it was still there. And I'm basically saying to him in baby language, I guess, can't you see it? And he couldn't see this. And
well, because children. It's known that children are extremely receptive to spirit, and they kind of lose that as they get older because the world around them influences so many things. If you're nurtured to understand that as a child, then you take it with you. But for me, I was 5, maybe even 4 when it started, because my room was on the main floor of the house, and that is where this spirit resided. And we had a brief conversation, you and I, about how spirit presents itself too. It's strange how some come in this mist, some come in a full-bodied apparition that looks so realistic to you that they're standing there, and then some come as shadow form. The spirit I had in my home was definitely a tall male, but all I could see of him was a black shadow. And I actually started calling him Uncle Paul. I don't know why I was calling him Uncle Paul. I did have an Uncle Paul that died before I was born, never met him. But for some reason, I called him Uncle Paul, and I was terrified at him coming into my room. He would come from the living room and walk into my room and stand at the edge of my bed. I didn't know it then that he was just trying to get my attention. I know that now. But Mom would say, oh, it was just a dream. So here I was dealing with Mom saying it was a dream. I could see he was there. I was scared. So I find it very intriguing how they come in different ways. We spoke about the mist, you and I. I know my dad came to me as a mist when I was having a mommy and me moment with my daughter. And then I had an experience with a mist in the mines here locally in Sussex County that was interacting with my group. It was so intriguing. We all took videos, and I sent one of the videos from the group into a local show called Paranormal Caught on Camera, and they actually featured it on their show. So I find it very intriguing that they come in different forms. I don't know if it's their energy is not strong enough to do one way as opposed to another. I'm not sure what it is, but I've experienced quite a different array of spiritual encounters, and I haven't got an explanation for it. I'm not trying to convince anybody of it. It's my experience. You want me to tell you about it? I'll tell you about it, and I'll share it with you. Believe me or not, I don't really care. It happened to me. I know what I experienced. I'm not trying to convince anybody. And that's kind of how I look at it.
That's the only way you can look at it. I mean, my questions are, was there any significance in the colour of this mist? Because it was a really, I still remember it now, it was a really dark purple. Now, I've been told that when you dream in black and white. I mean, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think I remember a lot of dreams are in colour. But this particular dream, and also at the age I was, I didn't know what ghosts were or anything like that. So to see this mist come swirling in and swirling around around me, and then to go back out the door again when my father came in. What was it? I don't know. It's
And
I
the
did ask
fact
my
that you
father
were,
years ago. Sort
the
of years
fact that
after.
you were, yeah, the fact that you were 18 months old and you actually could understand
That's a guess. I
purple,
mean,
that may have been some,
it was
that may
probably
have been
around
something
about
that
maybe
you,
18 months, 2 years. Yeah.
it may have been
You know,
something that came back to you as you were older when you're recollecting on it, that you see in your mind what you saw, and that's how you associated that purple mist. For me, the mist was just kind of like some have likened it to ectoplasm. I don't know that I would call it ectoplasm either. It was just this foggy mist, and it was an interactive mist in the minds. We would ask it to show itself again, and it would. Whereas the one with my dad, how I knew it was my dad, I just knew. And it
yeah.
came into the room and it swirled around. At first, I actually thought it was the house on fire. That's what I thought it was, until I got up to go to the door, and it came in and it whirled around the room and then went out the wall.
Yeah.
So
Well, like you,
it had no color though.
You could see it was like a controlled thing. Is it like it was a human?
Yes.
Yeah, it was some sort of a intelligence to it, because it swirled around and it all went out together. It weren't. I mean,
Yeah.
like smoke. Smoke usually disperses, doesn't it?
Yes.
In a room, it'll go in all different directions. But this was all in one direction, as if it was something flying through the air.
Exactly. And like I said, I was just sitting there having a mommy and me moment. So my first reaction when I turned to see it, I thought the house was on fire. But when I actually stood up to look and see what it was, that's when I realized, oh no, that's not what it is. It's something different. And like you said, it was definitely interactive and controlled. Whereas if it was smoked, it would have dispersed, as you say. So that's what made me realize, no, this is something different. And like I said, I don't know if my father put that in my mind. It's me, it's dad. Because the day he died, he came to me, he let me know he passed. So he's come to me many times over the years since his passing. But the first initial connection he and I had was the day that he died. And that's kind of what was a reawakening for me too, spiritually. That's what made me realize, you can sense spirit, go and do something about it. You have a mission and you just have to figure out what it is. And that was the start of it all for me, really.
Yeah. I mean, I did say to you before that it could well have been, I don't know, it's only conjecture, it could well have been one of my grandfathers, because both my grandfathers died when I was very young, or, I never knew my grandfathers because I was, they both died basically when I was young. And it also could have been the lady that rented the house to us, because she died around about that time as well. So maybe because she lived downstairs and we lived upstairs, I never knew her either. But apparently she died around about that time. So maybe she was having a last look round. Who knows? It's just
one of them coming to look in on the baby. They like children and small children and come. I know that it's very common for babies to be looking up and staring at the ceiling and ogling and googling and smiling, and it's not making sense to parents. What the heck are they looking at? So it's very possible that they came to just check in and check you out, maybe.
Yeah.
What did your dad say when you spoke to him several years later and brought it up to him?
He just said, "Oh, yeah, I remember that when you were talking about that."
He
and
did.
I said to him about
he did.
Yeah, you remembered it. And I said, "Yeah, I can still remember it clearly now, that it was a purple mist flying around." And he said, "I couldn't see anything," and that was that, So that was kind of the end of it. But I suppose he did wonder what was going on as well at the same time. Because if he remembered it as well, so it must have stuck in his head.
That's significant for sure. Have you had any other paranormal experiences since then? Did you realize that you yourself are sensitive to spirit in some way, shape, or form?
I don't regard myself as being sensitive whatsoever. But in later years, I did start going to spiritist churches, and I was told by a medium that I've got healing powers. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. That's what I don't know. I've actually tried it a couple of times, and I did learn to read
tarot,
the aura. I can actually see the aura around people, so I can only usually see a colour, like a grey colour around, but I can see aura. But nothing. I don't regard myself as being sensitive at all. But saying that,
I
we do all
wonder.
have it.
I absolutely, but I wonder if because you've been able to learn the color of auras, maybe that purple is significant for the aura of that spirit that you saw. Because I've seen that mist and have not seen color. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe. It was only because I was talking to a medium many years ago, before I started getting involved with radio shows and stuff like that.
Right.
I just happened to meet somebody I used to work with who was actually a medium, believe it or not. And he started saying about if you look at your hand, hold it up and stare in between, you'll actually start to see the aura around your fingers. And I started seeing it, and it's not an imagination thing either, because you can actually see it a lot if you actually concentrate on it. I think anyone can do that.
Have you ever learned anything about the different colors? Is purple a significant color or no?
No, I never got that far into it. As I say, all I can see is like a grey shape around the aura, and really that's as far as my psychic abilities go, as far as I know. Apart from the fact that we all get these senses about when you walk into a room, you can sense an atmosphere and all that sort of thing, or you could be thinking about. Or you could be thinking about somebody, and all of a sudden they'll phone you, and all that sort of stuff.
Even the inevitable tension in the room. If you feel that tension, you're feeling something. You're feeling somebody's mood. But it would be interesting to find out if purple is a significant color in the aura world. I don't know anything about it.
I've asked several psychics if they know what the purple means, and nobody really can give me an answer. But one of those things about relate. I mean, my wife is always saying, "I was just thinking." Well, I'll say something, and she says, "I was just thinking that you've done it again." So there must be something going on mentally between us. But the amount of times I've been thinking about someone, thinking, "Oh, I must phone them. I must phone them," and all of a sudden the phone will go and it's them.
Yeah, that's
maybe
sending
them a message, and then all of a sudden I must phone David.
I was just thinking about you. I was just going to call you.
It happens a lot. I mean, the amount of times it's happened, believe it, it's unbelievable.
It's true. Very true. So what's in store for you now ahead? I mean, I know you told me you were doing a monthly show for Outer Limits Magazine, new radio platform. What's going on with that?
We're not allowed to mention that, are we?
Oh, I thought. Oh, I did. Were we not supposed to? Oh, okay. Because you sent it to me in your description, so I didn't know.
No. I didn't know if Mark or Larkus mentioned in that, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm doing another monthly show as well, which is entirely different to the PA UK radio shows. It's entirely, they're not. I'm not using the same show to go on that as well. It's just another separate thing, really, and that's just one a month. So. Coming up with different
see how it goes and what what comes of it, and if they want more of it. That's interesting.
Yes, I might have had on the PA UK, but it's a completely different show again on there. I don't know how long that'll last for. It's for the Outer Limits magazine, but my prime position in the radio show is for PA UK radio. That's my, if it came down to a choice between the two, the PA UK radio would be the one that I would go for. It's as simple as that, really. Because I think that's the only fair way of doing it. But I mean, I'm often going to conferences and things, and I've got several coming up this year. I've been asked to speak at a place in June, I believe it is. It's for the Essex East Anglia group. They want me to do a talk, so I'll be doing that. I think about the end of June. I think it is sometime.
I understand why you would go to things like that if you're asked to speak. For sure, that's an understandable reason. Why would you go to these events otherwise? To make connections, or just to find out interesting topics, or what?
Because I'm interested in the people that are doing the talks themselves. I love that. To hear the actual people that I've not got. I've met quite a few people that at these conferences, and I've asked them if they'd like to come on my show in the past. And I've been lucky a few times to get them. So I had Rob Thompson was recent, which was actually he's quite a well-known name in the field of on the ghost shows. I think he's on Discovery somewhere. But yeah, he came on the show a little while ago. Maria Wheatley was on last week. So I've had quite a few, sort of well-known names on. And I've got a few more planned. I sit at the Awakening. I'm going to in Manchester in August, I think it is. And there's another one called what's it called? In September, there's another 2-week one where there's some US visitors coming over. So
it's got a good lineup going on.
Yeah, it's a good lineup.
Yeah.
So I can't think of the people that are coming now.
I love when you post stuff when you're trying to just take things apart. When you say, look at this. Why do you think it's so true? I love when you do that. I'm always tuning into what you're posting. I love that stuff too.
Yeah, well, there's questions to be asked all the time. And I think rather than me saying, this is that, I'll just put it up and say, you make your own mind up about it. I've got my own mind about it, and I think it's also less of a chance of getting banned as well.
I think it's great to create a justifiable argument for people to discuss, and then people can come to the forum and say, this is why I agree, this is why I disagree, and it certainly gives you food for thought. It definitely puts your mind at work to say, let me see what I think about this. And it makes for good entertainment, to say the least.
Yeah. And so on Facebook, I think most of this year, I've been banned because of it being a little bit controversial on certain things.
And what do they lock you out of Facebook for days on end, and then you get to come back on? Well, I'm back. They didn't like what I said this time.
Fascism at work.
So tell the listeners what your Facebook is and how they can find you on social media. I'm sure they would love to find you on social media on different platforms.
Yeah, well, I've got a page that supports the radio show, the Paranormal Dimensions. So if you go to Facebook and put Paranormal Dimensions, you should come across the show page. You can just find me under David Young. Probably just have to look for a photo of me, and I don't know. There's probably a number you can look up for it, but I imagine if you just put David Young and link me to the Paranormal Dimensions, you should be able to find me all right.
Have you finally gone?
Have you
finally gone to Instagram, or have you gone to TikTok and all that too?
TikTok I don't use really. Instagram, I've got a page on Instagram, but I rarely use it, to be honest. I don't use Twitter because I can't quite get my head around Twitter. I always want to say more than you're allowed to say on there. You're going to get a few likes, can't you? And I want to write sentences and I can't do it.
It's true.
I did actually start putting my shows on Twitter, and I thought, well, it was just pointless really a lot of the time. So really, I just sort of concentrate on Facebook most of the time. I didn't get banned for it, but yeah. But I mean, if anyone wants to look me up on Facebook, they can always get in touch with you. I'm on your friends list, so they can look me up from there, can't they?
That's right, they can. And I'm going to put the links on the show blurb too, so that they can find you there as well. Yeah,
I've got another couple of pages. I've got the Rendlesham Forest. Oh God, I can't think of the name of it now. Sorry, I started going into it. And then also I've got an SPI page, which is it's Strange Phenomena Investigations, Essex and East Anglia, which is I kind of put that, but I rarely do anything. I kind of wait for people to come along and say to me, I've got this going on, I've got that going on. But I did actually intend to actually set up an investigation thing where I could sort of go and investigate things. I just do the occasional ghost hunt like everyone else does now at the moment, like you do. But really with other people's ghost hunts, But yeah,
I've been getting into doing a lot of collaborations too. I mean, we have my core group of paranormal investigators that we call the New Jersey Spirit Hunters, because before, if you remember, we were formerly called the Lady Ghostbusters, and now I have quite a few men in the group. So as a group, we came up with the New Jersey Spirit Hunter name, just because we have men equal as many women. And I'm fine with that. And we are this core group, but we do have collaborative efforts with other paranormal groups, which is fun too, because you get to see their methods and how they go about doing an investigation, and you meet new people. I did a Paracon last year, which I've never done before. It was called the Sleepy Hollow Paracon, which is organized by Chris Sanders. And I might end up going back and doing it again this year, but last year was my first year doing it. And it was very interesting to meet so many other paranormals in the area and exchange information. And aside from it being good for contacts and people you might want to have on your show, it was just nice to meet other people that are like-minded and do possible investigations with down the line.
Yeah. I don't know if you find, what I find, most of the people that I get friendly with or get to know, they're all miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's sort of the other end of the country. I know Great Britain's not gigantic, but they're still a few hundred miles away.
A distance, sure.
Most of the people that I sort of really get friendly with, there's one or two people like 70 miles away, you know, which is not too bad. But to get together with some of these people sometimes it's not as easy as you'd like it to be, you know.
Wonderful have the power of modern technology where I can speak to you all the way over in the UK just by a push on the computer button, which is nice because in a world 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't possible. So it's nice to be able to do that now.
That's absolutely true, yeah. And also, if you ever get the chance to come over to the UK, you're always welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the same thing when you come over to the States. You know, Mark Johnson and I are neighbors. We live in the same county.
That's right.
So
yeah, that's right. I've just done a show with Mark, actually, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks. So
very
you
nice.
might find that interesting because Mark's coming over in August, I think it is.
Is he? Oh, good for him.
Yeah, so hopefully I'll get to meet him as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Together. So you might see a few photos of me and Mark coming up on the.
Oh, I would love that. That's wonderful.
Because he's coming over to see Irene as well, and probably
a few of us
will get together. So that
wonderful. That's great. Absolutely. Oh, have a great time, you guys. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This is very interesting to actually delve into your background and what it is that makes you tick and what's got you started in your show. So I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too confusing. Unfortunately, my life is quite confusing most of the time. So
whose isn't? But thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
And to listeners that are out there, if you enjoyed this week's episode and you're into all things paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Creepin' It Real podcast, out of the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if any of you are interested in reading any of my books, you can find the links to them on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com, where I write about the history of the town and location, and I add the paranormal story to the mix and finish it all off with photos and evidence. Everybody loves a good ghost story, but there's nothing better than a true ghost story. So check it out at authoreleanorwagner.com. Thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you, Eleanor. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.